want to concentrate on Dryden the Critic. We have, in a very brief summary, summarized the poetical work of Ben Jonson. His plays we shall see later on also, but the four important plays that are shown on the slide are The Wild Gallant, written in 1663, Marriage a la Mode, written in 1672, All for Love, 1678, and Aurangzeb, 1675. The last play must have been, the name at least of the last play must sound familiar to students of India, because it is based on the story of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. So these were the four plays, important plays. He has written many other plays also, but these are the four most important plays of Dryden. Now we come to the central part of our talk, that is Dryden as a critic, criticism of Dryden. And my friend Fatima Ben will elaborate about the importance of Dryden as a critic. How does he impact literary criticism in England? What was his contribution to English literary criticism? What were the principles that he advocated?
Okay, thank you, sir. And before we actually go into Dryden as a critic, I will be tempted to read a small little portion of his poetry from his play Marriage a la Mode. And the poem goes in this manner: Why should a foolish marriage vow, which long ago was made, oblige us to each other now? When passion is decayed, we loved and we loved as long as we could, till our love was loved out in us both. But our marriage is dead when the pleasure is fled. It was pleasure first made it an oath. This particular poem itself gives you the idea that here speaks the satirist. Okay, and the reason why we are more interested in the Dryden not only as a poet and a translator, because Dryden the poet, the translator, the playwright and the critic are all in one. They're not separate. His critical works have never been separately published, but they are either projected as his introduction or the prefaces of his work. So before going to the critic, let us take him as a translator also, because he was a very prolific writer. And as a translator, he has made innovative progresses in the field of translation and aesthetic philosophy. His outstanding translations are translations of Theocritus, Horace, Homer, Virgil, as you see on the screen, Lucretius, Boccaccio, Chaucer, Ovid, Persius, and other great Greek writers. And his most outstanding and ambitious works are that of Virgil, Chaucer, and Boccaccio. And for Virgil, you see, he has written in the fables of the ancient and modern. I'll just read a small piece of the fables. And it is such an interesting observation. Our two great poets, in the fables, to the preface to the fables, Dryden writes, our two great poets, being so different in their tempers, one choleric and sanguine, the other phlegmatic and melancholy. That which makes them excel in their several ways is that each of them has followed his own natural inclination as well in forming the design. The very heroes show their authors. Homer's author, Achilles, is hot, impatient, revengeful, whereas Virgil's hero, Aeneas, is patient, considerate, careful of his people, and merciful. This actually shows how deep an insight Dryden had for his heroes and for the characters whom he translated. The later translations of Dryden, he regarded Chaucer, Shakespeare and Milton with the greatest, highest esteem. Okay, and his translations with great esteem, and he considered Chaucer and Shakespeare in great esteem. Shakespeare he considered to be a genius. And Milton.
Yeah.
He considered Milton's poetry
to be of highest order.
It's a beautiful poetry of My Paradise Lost, and he considers Paradise Lost as a very sublime and a religious poem.
Yeah.
So this is how he understood these writers, the great writers, and he was full of esteem. It was like earlier we mentioned that he was very egoistic or something. Dryden was not like that. He gave due importance to his ancients also, his seniors also.
Yeah.
Now, considering Dryden as a critic, Dr. Johnson's view of Dryden is Dryden may be properly considered as the father of English poetry and criticism.
Yeah.
It is very true, during that time Dryden was definitely, Dr. Johnson was so much influenced by him that he considered him as the father of English poetry and criticism. Many critics have gone before Dryden.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you see, most of the critics have been sectional.
Yeah.
Some have either been philosophic ideas, they were favoring philosophic ideas, and some of them were favoring the narrow techniques.
Yeah.
But actually going to see, Dryden combined both of them together, the philosophic ideas and the narrow technique, and he broadened the scope of criticism.
Yeah.
So he presented one of his very finest works, the essay of dramatic poesy. And in that essay, we had to mention that in that essay he considers Dryden and all of them with great esteem.
Yeah.
Okay. The other best important works is Dryden's other criticism is the fables of heroic plays, the discourses on satire, and the dramatic poesy.
These are three important
works. The three important critical works
that
now,
because of the earlier also said, they were prefaces basically to these
either
works.
Introductions or prefaces. Now, actually, before going into more detail, because we have a time constraint, let us take dramatic poesy. Okay, dramatic poesy is during the time of 1665, when we mentioned earlier that there was a plague in London. And during that time, Dryden retired to his hometown. He went to Wiltshire and went towards theatrical writing. And there he wrote his Of Dramatic Poesy. Of Dramatic Poesy, because he is a neoclassic critic. And that is one of the reasons why he went to form and morality. Okay, he did focus upon form and morality. And this particular dramatic poesy is in the form of a dialogue. Where he has chosen 4 characters. And before we go to the play itself, let us consider the 5 issues that the dramatic poesy consists upon. The first is...
Yes, the slide shows.
Ancient versus modern. Now, Dryden wanted to convey whether the ancients were better writers or moderns, and that he does is through his dramatic poesy, through the discussions of the characters.
Sorry to interrupt. This controversy between ancients and modern seems to have taken a great hold on the minds of writers
the
of
neoclassics. Yes, definitely. They were constantly in controversy whether the Greek writers were better, because English language was also developing during that time. And Greek and Latin languages were considered to be the elite languages. Okay. And that is why the controversy between these two types of literatures were always in focus.
There was a constant comparison between
the two. And
because some critics tried to disparage native English writers by comparing them with the works of classical ancient writers, or the critical doctrines prescribed by classical Greek thinkers. So this conflict between ancient and moderns, as you said.
Then the second important thing was the 3 unities. 3 unities again was created by the Greeks, and the adherence to the unity of time, place and action. And the third issue that he picked up was French versus English drama, whether the French drama, again that same issue about whether the French drama was better or the English drama. And the fourth aspect was separation of tragedy and comedy versus tragicomedy. Now, tragicomedy was a romantic development by Shakespeare, whereas the Greeks believed in the separation of tragedy as well as comedy. And finally, the appropriateness of rhyme in drama. Shakespeare Shakespeare was a very unconventional writer, like how Dryden was. And being an unconventional writer, he had included rhyme and poetry as far as drama was concerned. So these 5 issues were discussed, and he had included 4 important characters. As we were talking about that, during that time this controversy was going on, and as a result, Dryden actually took up these 4 outstanding intellectual wits of that time. But he hid their personalities behind the borrowed names of Eugenius. Okay.
It is there on the slide.
It's there on the slide. You see Eugenius, then Critus, Lycidius, and Neander. These are the 4 characters, and Neander is Dryden himself. Whereas the other 3 characters are the characters who are the wits or intellectuals during that time.
During this period.
Now the discussion between the 4 characters was that Eugenius favors the moderns over the ancients, because Eugenius believes that the moderns have benefited from the ancients. The moderns have learnt a lot from the rules and regulations set up by the ancients. Second is Critus. Critus favors the ancients to the moderns, and he establishes, because he believes that the ancients establishes the dramatic rules and all the regulations which the moderns have picked up. Not only just that, he said that the British writers and the French writers, all of them, all the current outstanding writers are adhering to all the rules set up by the ancients, and that's why the ancients were much better than the moderns.
So this tendency, neoclassical tendency to adhere to the rules prescribed by the
naturally, that is one of the neoclassic characteristics also.
Neoclassic. How do we define neoclassicism? And one of the characteristics of neoclassicism is this desire to adhere to the rules of classical Greek writers.
And then you have Lycidius, and he argues that the French drama was superior to the English drama, and basically because the French drama adhered to all the rules. Okay, and again Lycidius, one more aspect about Lycidius was that he did not like the tragicomedy. He believed in the separation of tragedy and comedy. And finally, Neander, who is Dryden himself, he takes the middle path, I believe, and he favors the moderns, but at the same time, as we mentioned, he does not disparage the ancients. Nor does he is not critical about anybody. I think he picks up the best from all. And he believes in the neoclassics, he believes in the romantics, some of the aspects of the romantics, like the non-adherence to unities. He does not believe in the adherence to unities. At the same time, he favors the tragicomedy.
He is the voice of reason.
He is the voice of reason. He is the voice of progress also.
Okay. I think it was I'm not forgetting. It was Dryden who said that had Aristotle seen our plays, then he would have changed
obviously,
his mind.
Definitely.
And so that shows that Aristotle, when he wrote his Poetics, he was not prescribing rules. He was simply analyzing the plays that were before him.
Obviously, because he was a critic of that period of time. Whereas Dryden, after 1,000 years, is a critic. So now let's take Dryden as a critic, and we are going to focus upon 3 important aspects of Dryden: the function of poetry, the object of critics' appreciation, and the theory of comparative method. So, as far as the function of English poetry is concerned, this particular idea has been discussed by several writers. Okay, and Plato, if we begin with the first critic, Plato, we will find that Plato said that the main function of poetry is to teach. Then came Aristotle. Aristotle said that the main function of poetry is to delight. Delight is the chief aim of poetry. Okay, and if any teaching happens, it can happen, but delight is the chief aim. Then came Longinus, and he said not only to teach, delight, but also to move,
transport.
And that is why that is his theory of sublimation. Then you have Philip Sidney, who takes a middle path and he says delightful teaching.
Yeah.
But Dryden is very direct. He says delight is the chief, if not the only end of poetry.
Yeah.
And then he says instruction, whatever comes, can take the second place only. And the last important line of Dryden, which is the most impressive, for poesy, he says, only instructs if it delights. If a work of art does not delight, then it cannot teach. And I think we see that very often, that so many works of art, you see the Indian movies, the latest movie, Three Idiots you have, and the Lagan and all these movies, they have a message which goes directly to the young generation. Rather than all the kind of religious or didactic sermonings that keep going on. And that is why work of art gives more pleasure. The work of art that gives more pleasure will automatically instruct unknowingly. So that was what was his important aim, and that's why Dryden says that his chief aim, he says, my chief endeavor is to delight the age in which I live. Okay. So this is the most important aspect of Dryden. Second, we take the idea of imitation. This particular idea of imitation has also been discussed by so many writers, so many critics. If you take Plato, Plato says that Plato was against poetry because poetry imitated life. And he said that poetry was a copy of a copy, which was twice removed from the original. Then came Aristotle. Aristotle said, no, poetry must copy. A poet must copy, must imitate, but in a certain way. Okay. And the poet, after, when he puts his imagination to it, he imitates and produces life, heightens life, and represents life. Okay. But Dryden, he says, he is very much belongs to the school of Aristotle, and he says a poet must imitate in a certain way. And when a poet imitates, he heightens the beauty of life and hides the obscurity of life, hides the ugliness of life. If you take, again, if I refer to Plato, because simultaneously I would like to compare all of them to make a bit of clarity to the students. That first is that Plato, while projecting or justifying his theory of imitation, he used the example of a carpenter's bed. Okay.